All right. Welcome everyone to the April 2026 5 Miles from Anywhere meeting. Um, it's great to see you guys. As I just said to the crowd that's already here, little odd because we're meeting in the middle of the month, and usually we always meet the first Saturday of the month. But we were able to make this work, and we have a wonderful guest here. Ben Congdon is going to talk about his Sherlock Holmes writing and his artwork. And so I'm looking forward to the meeting. Also going to give a shout out to a few people as we go along with the announcements. And because I want to give Ben plenty of time, I'm going to jump right in to, here we are. And here we go. All right. So, couple of things. So we'll start with the announcements, and then Ben will talk about the Archive of Sherlock Holmes Volume 1, and we should have time for some questions at the end. All right, a couple of announcements, and it's cool that Anna's here because we have the Lizzie Borden podcast latest episode. Brian and I are on talking about Belanger books and a little bit about some of our publications that have Lizzie Borden as a character in them. It's a really cool podcast, and if you get a chance, give it a listen. It's a lot of fun. And Anna, do you want to say anything about it, or is that good?
Well, that's great. Yes, Brian and Derek made a really fun episode talking about their books, but just in general, even though it's called the Lizzie Borden podcast, it's not always about Lizzie Borden. It's about things that are Victorian and whether in America or in England and lots of different things. So give it a listen. I think you'll enjoy it.
Thank you, Anna.
You.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Um, Also, if you, I know I'd sent this out to the group as well, but if you get a chance, episode 47 of Sherlock Monthly, I was one of the guests with Dan Stashauer, and we discussed The Devil's Foot. A lot of fun with Ed Pettit, who was the host, obviously. It was a lot of fun, and if you get a chance, listen to it. Really, Dan is just a plethora of knowledge too, and so wonderful. He's probably my favorite Doyle biographer, and so it was just a real treat to be on the podcast with him as a guest. All right, and our own Micah, who was our guest last month, who did that wonderful Sherlock Holmes or card trick and spelled out the dancing men. If I'm not sure, I remember using the dancing men. It was such a treat. And he is going to be speaking at the August meeting of the Shaka Sherlockians, the Hawaii Sherlockian group. And I can't wait to see that one. Micah, I think you're on. Are you going to do another magic trick when you're on the Hawaiian show?
Hey, Derek, longtime listener, first time caller. Thanks for taking my call, Derek. And yeah, they want me to do a quick about 20-25 minute close up act. So it'll be the routine I got to perform for you and you wonderful people, plus a few more. And yeah, thank you. And also, since you were kind enough to take my call, we do have the recording of the uh, uh, closing night of Last Case of Dr. Watson, and two hot, young, up and coming dramatic critics named Derek and Ginny have already said something nice about it. So if you would like to see it, just email me and I'll include that in the chat. And again, Derek, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for all of your support.
Well, thank you. It was a wonderful play, and I hopefully at some point I'll get to see it live. Hopefully it keeps going. I'd love to see it perform because the recording is great, but recordings are recordings, and so just seeing it live would be fantastic. A lot of fun. Thank you, Micah, as always. All right, 221 BCon. I want to talk about this because this was a blast and so fun to go. That you can see Brian is having a lively debate there with the goose from the Blue Carbuncle, who happens to look a little bit like Steve Mason, just a touch. I think that might be related, but that was a lot of fun. You can see we went to the Waffle House Museum. I just have to say, guys, if you are gonna go to if you just I want to try out a Sherlock Holmes conference, this is a very good one to try out because it's wacky, it's fun. I mean, there's big Sherlock Holmes panels like on, Doyle's horror writing, for example. But then there's also like there's karaoke night. It's just a lot of fun. And so if you do get a chance, it's in Atlanta in April every year. And so and they were afraid it was going to close, but it's going to keep going. And one of the great things about it is just meeting some of the people, some of our 5 Miles members. And so here we have Tiger. Right here. We got to finally meet. Tiger had a wonderful, one of Tiger's own, her dioramas, I guess, or boxes. I'm still not sure exactly what to call them. Just what a creative artist. Uh, and I kind of felt like, oh my goodness, I'm meeting one of my friends here. I mean, one of my like heroes in a sense, because everything Tiger does is brilliant, and just Tiger gives it away. It's brilliant. And there's Shayna rocking it out to I Can Dance Like Sherlock Holmes. That was so fun. That was at karaoke night. And so yeah. Um, I see Joanna has her hand up. Do you want me to pause and so you can say something, or should I keep going through the panels?
I just wanted to say one thing, which was
Go
that
for
you
it.
called it a conference,
Yeah?
and we call it a convention
Oh,
because
sorry.
no, it's not a big deal. It's only important in that for a lot of people who've been to Sherlockian conferences where there's one track of programming that everybody goes to, and then you break and you go to the vendors and you break and you go to lunch or whatever. This is more like a convention in terms of we have 4 tracks of programming going at any given time, plus the social events Derek mentioned. I just don't want people to get the wrong impression, is all.
No, no, that's absolutely fine. Although I think from that first visual of Brian talking to the goose, I don't think they're gonna get the wrong idea, but I agree with
Yeah.
you. Oh, all right. So fun. Um, Also, want to give a shout out to Darren and Ruth, and I see that they are here today for the first time as a 5 Miles.
Yay.
Um, and it was wonderful to meet them. They came up to Brian and I and said they were big fans, which was cool. And then I found out that they actually have their own podcast and they have a Sherlock Holmes episode from 2017. It was very cool. They also have a Sherlock Hound episode I was just listening to right before we jumped on here. But honestly, guys, check out their network. It's a really cool thing because they have a ton of different podcasts. Like they have one that's on like spy shows, so it's like the Avengers, the Prisoner. So like everything about their podcast is so cool. A lot of my favorite shows are mentioned in there, so I was very excited. And again, just look up the Rad Adventures Network, and there's a bunch of different ones. Um, Darren, Ruth, did you want to say something, or is this cool?
Oh,
Oh,
thank you so much for the shout out.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I really appreciate that. It was unexpected. And just so people know, what does RAD stand for, Ruth?
Ruth
And
and
Darren. So
R-A-D.
we don't think we're rad. We're just Ruth and Darren. So we go by RAD.
I think you're rad.
Yes.
That's cool. You guys
Second.
do
You're awesome. Thank you.
very creative and cool topics for the pod. I mean, having Cadillacs and dinosaurs. I hadn't heard of that comic in a long time, so it was cool to see you guys are into that one. Very, very fun. So yeah, keep up the great work. And maybe we can have you guys on 5 Miles talking about your podcast in the fall. It'd be great. So we'll chat. Okay. Thank you. All right. And of course, I can't conclude without saying that we had a Solar Ponds panel, Max McGee and I, talking about the Essential Solar Ponds book, which is coming out, as well as just introducing the character. For those of you who don't know, Solar Ponds is the Sherlock Holmes of Praed Street. It was a wonderful thing. George, we had a number of the new PSI pins, and they sold quite well. A lot of people were very excited about the Ponds character, and hopefully we can do something like that again next year. It was a lot of fun. All right, and that was a lot for me. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute to see if anybody else has any announcements for the good of the cause. Often somebody does.
I do, Derek.
Go for it, Anna.
First of all, I like that t-shirt you were wearing.
Oh yeah, I know, huh?
Yes. Well, I produce from my Scion some anthologies.
Recording in progress. Shift.
Well,
I've
that's
done
nice.
two so far, but I'm working on a third, and this time I'm expanding it to anyone. It used to just be New England Sherlockians, but now I'm expanding it to anybody, anybody who wants to contribute. And I do accept things that have already been published as long as you have the copyright. So you don't necessarily have to write something new, but if you want to submit anything, poetry, toast, fiction, scholarship, artwork. So just and I can put my email in the chat. So if you have anything, just reach out to me. Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's been really good, and I know we've met a few people, especially at the con, who are like poetry and things like that. Would you accept something like that, Anna?
Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't say poetry. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Excellent. Very, very good. And it's a great journal, I have to say. Very well done.
Thank you.
All right. Any other announcements for the good of the cause before we get Ben going here? All right. Oh, Shayna, what's up?
Hi, so I'm trying to find the information. I was hoping to get it called up before, you had last call for announcements, but
Sure.
the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, their spring luncheon is coming up. So I am just trying to pull that information. It is, sorry.
You're good.
Let's see. Here we go. Saturday, May 23rd. It will be at Tony's Di Napoli restaurant on 3rd Avenue, which has been the venue for several years now. If you want further information about that, the person to contact is Evelyn Herzog. And let me see if I can put that email in the chat. Where the heck?
And if you can't find it, Shane, you can always send it to me and I'll send a follow-up email to the whole group.
We might have to do that, yeah.
Yes,
But anyway, so
completely
heads up
possible.
in May, Ash Spring Luncheon. Save the date.
Perfect. And you guys meet, is it quarterly?
So there's, the luncheons happen spring and fall.
Okay.
And then of course there's the Ash Wednesday dinners, but that's a very casual get together and kind of run separately.
Right.
Jana,
Mhm.
where is this? I mean, what, like city and state?
Oh, it's in New York. It's here in Manhattan. Yeah, Saturday, 23 May at 1 o'clock. Okay, here we go. Ash Spring meeting. There we are. So I put her email in the chat.
All right. Thank you so much, Shayna. All right, my friends. I'm just going to share my screen briefly one more time, and then I'm going to let Ben take over, but I would like to introduce him. All right. And look at that wonderful artwork that you can see displayed there. Ben is an award-winning author, illustrator, and painter whose inspiring creations have appeared in publications and galleries throughout the United States. A lifelong fan of the great detective, Ben has painstakingly analyzed the brilliant work of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle so that he might bring to life those lost cases to which Doyle alluded but never fully described. And I have to say, he does a very good job, particularly the book he's going to talk about, the second story in particular, I found it reminded me a lot of a Doyle Sherlock Holmes story or a Watson Sherlock Holmes story. So very, very well done. And let's give a warm virtual welcome to Ben Congdon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Derek.
You're
Brian.
welcome, sir.
I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. Absolutely. Especially as I got a chance to look back over the catalog of some of the recordings that you've posted on YouTube. I wanted to get a feel for just how it worked, and I was really impressed not just with some of the illustrious speakers that you've been able to bring on, but just the knowledge of the group. what everybody brings to the table from their own backgrounds, from the different geography that you come from, because I can just see these pockets of intense fandom from all over the world. And it's so neat to discover that, because I'll talk about it in a little bit. But when I was getting into this, and I still see myself as just at the very beginning of trying to figure out some of the wider world of Sherlockians, and I was really blown away by the amount of intense fans that are out there, and then the depth of their knowledge, like I said, and just what everybody does to keep these stories alive has really inspired me to do my homework to make sure that what I'm doing is, going to do justice to the stories that we all know and love so well. So I figured what I do today, because I don't have a lot of this background. Some of these authors and speakers you brought on, they have a list of accomplishments that you could talk about for 15 minutes. And I'm a neophyte in this one. So I figured that I would share just a little bit about myself, where I'm coming from, and I can share a screen here and get into it. I should be able to. And then the artwork in particular, I know is going to be a big draw. It's going to be something that is different than some other authors, and I'll talk about that as well. Show some examples. So here we go. Can everybody see the screen all right? Okay. So Derek was saying I'm currently still writing, but I've put out 2 books under the title The Archives of Sherlock Holmes, and I'll get to that. But a little bit about me. I live near Austin, Texas, just north of Austin. Been here for many years, although my wife and I, in just a couple of months, we're actually going to be moving to North Carolina. And I do know that there's some Sherlockians in that neck of the woods as well. So perhaps I'll have a chance to connect with some that are in that area. I'm a secondary art teacher. I teach middle school and high school art. It's very different talking to this age range, this group, this people who are coming in. I'm not making any comments about age, by the way, but it is very refreshing not to have, students putting gum in their hair and throwing things at each other and, fighting for attention. So this is, Derek, I appreciate it. This is a nice break from what I'm used to. So when I'm not teaching, I enjoy wildlife and landscape oil painting. That's something that I'd gotten into several years ago. So I do have some work in galleries. And when I started to approach this idea to write my own stories based on the Holmes unwritten cases, those lost tales, I wasn't sure with the art, should I do it? And am I really equipped for it? Because as I'll mention in a little bit, I wanted everything to be as authentic as it could be. And I love that wildlife and landscape oil painting, but when it comes to doing people and the way that Sidney Paget would, show Victorian London and Holmes and Watson, and then just everything about them, I wasn't sure if I was up to the task. And so we'll look at some of the artwork and kind of see how it evolved over time. I'm from a big family. I'm one of 8 kids. And what I'll say about that is just that when we were growing up, we weren't a family where my parents were able to just throw toys and all kinds of vacations and stuff at us kids. And so one of the things we did have, though, was stories. I have a lot of respect and appreciation for my dad, who for many years would read us stories at night, get everybody around. Maybe at the time we weren't really appreciative of it, but Sherlock Holmes first made his appearance in my life there. And he just really instilled a love of narrative in me over the years that I thankfully haven't lost, and I've continued to carry it with me. And yeah, I started writing my first Holmes pastiche in 2022. So these are the 2 books that I've put out so far. The first one, The Shocking Affair of the Dutch Steamship Friesland, just as Watson put it. I wasn't sure if that title was going to be a little too long for a book, but I couldn't think of one that was better than the way that Watson had first put it. I won't talk too much about the first one. It was a great learning experience. I'd never tried writing to sound like Doyle, or really to sound like anybody. I hadn't done a lot of writing of my own. And to pair that with artwork was a big jumping off point. It was pretty intimidating. but it was something I knew that I wanted to do. And I realized if I didn't get down to it and try it out, I probably never would. It was at a time in my life when I had the ability to try it out. So I've worked in graphic design, which was helpful because I could do things like the cover design and some of the book layout and things like that. But it was a steep learning curve. I will say that. Even just the writing process, if we have some other authors here, I'd be very interested to know if this happened to you. But when I sat down to start writing that story, which just appealed to me because, as you'll remember, I believe in the beginning of the Norwood Builder, when Watson's talking about it, and he says that it was a case in which they very nearly lost their lives. That, of course, is a very intriguing premise, and I know that many others have tackled that story as well. But I was thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to start somewhere, that sounds like a good jumping off point. What could have possibly happened where Holmes and Watson almost lost their lives in the course of solving this mystery? But what I'd be interested in hearing from other authors is if when they wrote their stories, they ended up being far longer than they intended. Because the first book was only meant to be the standard length, if you will, roughly the standard length of the stories that Doyle would write. And it was much closer to like A Study in Scarlet in length by the end. Perhaps not quite that long, but the story, while I like it, it did sort of get a little bit out of my hands. I was kind of holding on to the story as it took me along. I wasn't really crafting everything. And so it was a neat process, but it ended up being longer than I thought it would be. So I put it out as its own book, as its own story. And by the way, these are just self-published. I kind of set up with a print-on-demand system, and again, it was just that learning process and trying to figure out what's the best way not just to write the story but to get it out there. And I didn't have any real aspirations that it would go anywhere. I didn't know if I would ever write another story after that. It was just something I wanted to try. And again, while I know there are so many wonderful authors out there that have taken on these exact same stories and their own, the one thing I thought that I could bring to it was when you read a story and you're always kind of picturing it in your mind. I've heard some recent speakers on the podcast here talking about seeing it like a movie in their head. And I tend to do that as well. And I'm always thinking when I read something, I wonder what the author was picturing. What did the author have in mind when they described this scene, this character? And I thought it would be an interesting challenge to pair my own design and illustration with my own writing. So I thought that was something that I could bring that was a little bit new, even if the stories themselves have certainly been tried before. So anyway, I did that. And while I wasn't sure if I'd write again, you can see that I certainly did. The first book just had one story and an introduction, which I'll talk about because it plays into the idea. Volume 1, which I'll show a little bit more about this one, it has 3 stories in it. And again, they're just ones where I just was intrigued by something about them. The title, a little morsel that Doyle would have dropped behind, but they got my attention. And so, but what are the archives of Sherlock Holmes? Basically, in a really brief synopsis, I wrote an introduction, a short story to kind of explain that. And I found out after I had put it out that in a very nice way, several people had let me know this wasn't necessarily established canon. Not canon as far as what Doyle would have written, but there is established, generally accepted canon about other events outside of Doyle. And because I'm so new to it, some of these I hadn't read, I hadn't heard of them before. But here's how I presented the archives. It's many, many years in the future. And in this imagined future of mine, Holmes has actually passed away before Watson, which I thought someone who lived the lifestyle that Holmes did live, those extreme highs, extreme lows, sometimes not eating and sleeping for days on end. I assumed that was certainly a possibility that he could have been someone who, physically speaking, would have burned out before Watson. But Watson receives a letter from Mrs. Hudson, who's still around, still in Baker Street, and she's letting him know that the Baker Street rooms are set for not demolition, but renovation, everything being cleared out and then relet onto the London market. She asks if Watson wants to come down and take one last look and take anything with him. So long story short, Watson does, and he finds a scrap of paper something that was just left behind, but it has Holmes' handwriting on it. And it seems to be pretty nonsensical, doesn't really have much to do, but he wanted anything he could find. But he realizes that the bits of writing that Holmes, he's listing off some kind of obscure London addresses. And Watson discovers that these are actually what Doyle referred to, or Watson referred to, as the bolt holes, some of those hideaways that Holmes would have used throughout London. I forget which story that was mentioned in by Watson, but it's established that Holmes would have had these hideaways. And Watson kind of goes on this wild goose chase trying to see if any of them still exist. And through his search, he stumbles upon one that still does, a locked room, and inside are these personal records, these things that Holmes had kept of his own cases. I'd mentioned through that introduction that Watson had always intended to write more of these cases, but through his move out of London years before, there'd been a flood and some accident, and he'd lost a lot of his own records. And so he kind of despaired of ever writing anything more. So it was just my way of kind of showing this kind of neat one last little chance for Watson to get out there and solve a little bit of a mystery and come across what I would say would be the archives, the personal records that Holmes had kept, which would allow Watson to continue writing these stories. So since I haven't had a chance to read what so many other authors have done with this, I don't know if that is a somewhat original take or if many others have done something like that. But that's how I started with it. And then simply why write these Sherlock Holmes? Just because they mean so much to me. They always have. That love of narrative that I still carry with me, a big part of that would have been just the stories that were read to me when I was very little. And I still have memories of my dad taking us to the local mall, which he would never do something like that usually, but there was a video store there that had some harder to find things. And I remember him looking for the VHS tapes of the Granada Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes series, which he introduced me also to those at a very young age. And I know that of all the great portrayals that have been out there, many do love those, put them near the top. And I certainly do as well. So I have great appreciation for what Granada and Brett and Edward Harwick and David Burke and the others really brought to that series. And so that was another reason why. So I thought if I was going to write something and try to do justice to something that these series of stories had meant so much and done so much for me, that I wanted to see if I could do right by them. So the illustration work, and so what I'm bringing here, I'm an illustrator by nature, going back a long way, but I've gotten into painting. And as I started getting into this and decided I would illustrate, I was looking at the great Sidney Paget work, those famous illustrations, and what I would see, what you'd normally see, perhaps wouldn't be the original work that he had done, but the work that would have been handed off to engravers and used for mass publication. And I wasn't actually sure, I wasn't aware of that whole process as I started out. I just knew that being so far removed from the world that Holmes and Watson were in, so far removed from even modern day London, I still have actually had a chance to visit. I was married this past summer, and my wife and I went to Scotland and Ireland. And in Edinburgh, I had a chance to, of course, see some of these locations that are connected. But I do hope to make it to London at some point. But not having been there myself, I just had to rely as much as I could upon anything that I could scrounge and get together. I've got several of these old high resolution maps and newspapers, just trying to cobble together as much material as I could, because as I started the writing, I obviously wanted that to not be anachronistic. I didn't want it to be something that would just ring hollow or untrue to a group like this, people who eat, sleep, and breathe these stories and know them so well. And while I'm sure that I've made a few missteps along the way, I've done my best to be as faithful and accurate as I could to Doyle's style, to his voice and to his writing, but also to just the world that he was living in, and just trying to make that, show up in both the writing and in the artwork. So Originally, the work was much more either pen and ink, or this is actually a scratchboard illustration that was done here. And I did that because, like I said, you see the publications, you see the published Paget artwork, and much of it appeared to be that way. It was done in engraving, and I do love that. That was some of the earliest artwork that I did, was that fairly detailed pen and ink work. And so you can see here, I was trying to, what was the outfit of a London constable, even something like a street lamp. What would that have looked like? I'll often pose myself in positions and trying to, just get something that's pretty accurate, because even though I have a good background in art and design, designing people, the human figure, which Paget was so good at, so adept at, that's not my area of strength. And so I'm still trying to improve that as I do my work. And as I go through these pictures, you'll probably see something of an evolution in the style of work that I was choosing to do, but I hope the work also somewhat improving as it was going along as well. So yeah, about that illustration style, these are just two images I chose because they show architecture and structure from the stories. And the one on the left is definitely done with pen and ink. It's, again, more or less like some of those pictures you might see in the publications. But I remember watching another podcast, and I wish I could remember which one it was, but the two men were talking about Sidney Paget's work and how his original illustrations would have been more than likely, more often than not, done in ink wash, with gouache, some other applications of paint, and some pen and ink. But I was interested to hear how then that would be handed over to engravers, and sometimes they were talking about this, the work that you would get on the other end. You wonder how much it was faithful to Paget's original illustration, or if it varied, and if the engravers were maybe having an off day, if something maybe didn't quite translate. I think I remember once reading that Doyle had even suggested Paget make Holmes less handsome in his early illustrations, and then from that, maybe where Paget took Holmes. I'm not sure if that's absolutely true or not, but so as I went along in these stories, I actually shifted from this pen and ink into an ink wash technique, trying to emulate Paget as best as I could. So these are some of the earlier illustrations for the Dutch steamship Friesland, and I do like them. I do like this style of artwork, but there's just something with the atmospheric quality of this ink wash that Paget would have used. And then some of these engravings, the famous ones, they're terrific. They're wonderful. I was just reading that I believe of Paget's 350 Sherlock Holmes illustrations, only 30 or so of the originals still exist, which is, it's sad to think about, but you also wonder if someone's got a dusty old book somewhere and they open it up and there's a Paget illustration sitting inside or something. Who knows? It does make you wonder if some of them are still floating around out there. So this would have been more of a tight, controlled pen and ink. And then there's this house again. You can see some of the reference images. I was looking for a certain time period of architecture, and specifically a broken down, kind of crumbling house. But this was one of the first pictures that incorporated a little bit of ink wash. I was trying to get a little bit more of that depth and that atmosphere that was in there. And then this one here is one of the last illustrations from my first book, from the Dutch steamship Friesland. It certainly brings to mind the sign of four. And I certainly mentioned that through Watson, that the way that this particular scene was happening is similar. But in doing the research and everything, and then this particular shot, I decided I'm going to use some pen and ink, but I'm really going to introduce more of this ink wash, because I just found out that was how Paget would have done most of his work. And I enjoyed so much what it was able to bring, as far as the still keeping detail, but having more of that depth and a little bit more atmosphere, especially in, this is a pretty intense dark scene that was happening right here. And then the last illustration in that book is the first one that I'd done all ink wash. It was a little bit of a confusing sentence, but this was the first illustration that was no pen and ink, everything done in ink wash. And I really, really liked what it was doing. Those of you who liked the Granada series, you can certainly see where I'm taking some inspiration from the way that they'd set up their sets, and then the room at 221B. I can't help myself as much as the stories. I want them to be faithful to the original. A lot of the illustration work, you may notice, will at least have inspirations and echoes of some of what are in those Granada series, even though I take from a lot of other sources as well. So how to portray Holmes was interesting, a big challenge, because when I first started with that first book, like I said, I'd never tried anything like it before. I didn't even know if I could write to a level of faithfulness that I wanted to. But Holmes is, of course, he's a genius. He's a tortured genius. He's somebody who, thinks in ways that others don't. And I can assure you, I'm not a genius. I do not think that way. And, some of these stories, people have said, oh, I read Holmes for the first time. I read Doyle, and I figured it all out long before it got to the end. I was never that person. I was always along for the ride. And then I was just, what a great reveal at the end. And so I was like, well, I don't know. Can I write Holmes? Can I make it feel authentic to the brilliant man that we all know? When it comes to the artwork, it was certainly an interesting challenge as well, because he's described quite well by Watson and by Doyle, but the work certainly did evolve as it went. You can see a pen and ink on one side that has some of that ink wash, and then on the right side is one from volume 1 from my newer book, all done in ink wash. And so I love Paget's work. And then, like I said, Holmes did sometimes appear slightly different in some of his illustrations. And I have no doubt that in mine, Holmes might shift a little bit as I've gotten a little more used to designing him and his character. I'm posing myself in a lot of these pictures, taking reference images just to help me. And a few of my siblings, at least, have claimed that they keep seeing my face showing up in my Holmes illustrations. That was never my intention. I'm trying to avoid that myself. But, if it happens, it's hopefully something I can minimize as I go forward and do more of these illustrations. But yes, again, you get some definite shout outs to the Granada series, the curtains, the windowsill, even the place settings on the table and the illustration on the right. They certainly were ones that if you were watching those episodes from the Jeremy Brett series, you might see some of those things that look a little bit familiar there. But anyway, just Holmes' mannerisms, just the kind of things that he'd be doing, his posture, that's all still a work in progress. As I get more comfortable doing, human figures and really trying to do well by him, especially, I'm excited to keep working on these, because while it started out with the one book and I wasn't sure if I would continue on with it, the reception from it was always something small. It was never meant to be. I was telling Derek, it was never meant to be a money-making thing. This was just a passion project. But I was really encouraged by those who got back to me with good critiques, with things that could be improved, but also saying that it felt authentic enough to them that they wanted to hear more. They wanted to, hear my take on some of these other stories. And so as humbly as I could, I decided I wanted to continue both with developing the illustrations and trying to make that world feel authentic, and then more of these stories that I was always intrigued by what could be. When you love them so much, you read 60 of these stories, and then you're like, oh, that was great, but what's next? And I certainly know that it's standing on the shoulders of giants, of others, and pale comparisons. But I didn't personally feel like I wanted to introduce something entirely new. I didn't want to, bring it so far away from what Doyle had mentioned, Watson had mentioned, that it felt very removed from it. And that's not to say that there aren't wonderful stories that are out there of Holmes and Watson where, they might have been in a location that Doyle wouldn't have said, or a time period that doesn't quite fit. And that for me isn't an issue. It's just another expression of the love for these characters. For me personally, though, I didn't feel perhaps equal to that task, and I wanted to stay in a pretty narrow lane of what Doyle perhaps could have written if we were stumble across some manuscript or something like that. Anyway, so portraying Sherlock Holmes, this was the last illustration that I did for volume number 1 for that most recent book. And I like the direction that Holmes is going. I feel that I've got a better feel for his character and more comfortable writing him as well. So as I go forward, I want to continue developing both of those things. So what I want to do real quick, I would just give a really quick little breakdown of the stories. I'm not going to share the plot or anything, but you can see the 3 that I included in volume 1, the Adventure of the Mad Colonel, or Colonel Warburton's Madness, the Ancient British Barrow, and the Adventure of the Tired Captain. And again, those 3 they would have offered something to kind of spark my attention when I was trying to decide what stories would go into this. So the Adventure of the Mad Colonel, this one is, for my version of this one, it's a fairly dark story. And I knew from the beginning that just as a break, I wanted to have the story take place outside of London, not be too far flung, but somewhere that perhaps I don't believe that other cases had gone to just yet. And so this one is set in the far west of England on the coast of the Irish Sea. It was intriguing to me because it was mentioned, through Watson. It's one of only 2 cases that he brought to Holmes' attention. I believe in some of the official or unofficial canons, it has a specific year, perhaps 1884. I believe in mine, I put 1885 as the year, but it also was interesting because it was one that could have taken place early in the relationship with Holmes and Watson. And yeah, like I said, I wrote it in a way where I think it has a good mystery, but the atmosphere of such a remote and isolated setting, it kind of appealed to me. I might be drawn a little bit more to the darker side of things. I'm not sure, but in this case, it was one where I decided, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write more than just the one story. And so this was the first one that I got into after book number 1. And it was a challenge picking up the pen again, but I think it turned out well. The Ancient British Barrow, this was one of the most fun ones for me to write, just because I have a real love of history and archaeology. Back when I was that little kid digging around in the yard, that was what I wanted to be. I thought, I want to be an archaeologist when I grow up. So in this case, as much as I want to stay faithful to Doyle, some of these unwritten tales, lost cases, he doesn't give anything beyond just a name. And so it certainly opened up a lot of possibilities for what the story could be. This one it's a little bit shorter. Like I said, some of my stories tend to go a little bit beyond Doyle's, we'll call it the standard length, wherever that might be, 10, 11, 12,000 words. But this one, I think just because, the story itself, the like I said, the historical element to it and everything kind of just came together pretty well. And I was able to write it, for me, fairly quickly, which I've seen the pace that some of the other Holmes authors can put out their work, and it's astounding. I don't know how they write and craft as quickly as they do. I've never been known to write very, very quickly. So anyway, this one did come together pretty well, though. And yeah, I like the deductions, and I like that it kind of culminates in a chase and a manhunt. And so I like the way that this one turned out. And then so the last story in the book is The Adventure of the Tired Captain, one of the many, many cases from 1894. I'm not sure exactly how they all fall in that year, but I believe, if memory serves, I'm working on just finishing a story right now that is also one of the cases from 1894. It's back in London. And this one was interesting because when you talk about The Adventure of the Tired Captain, is this a nautical captain? Is this a military captain? What might it be? And I actually originally intended it for it to be a ship's captain. The story kind of ended up working as a military captain. And it's partially inspired by a real life event. There was a case from 1930s or 40s, I think 1940s, of the Somerton man near Adelaide, Australia. I like hearing some of these real life historical mysteries and cases. And not to say too much about this story, but in the real life story of the Somerton Man, there was a well-dressed man who was seen kind of reclining against a wall on a beach. And people claim that he had been just kind of sitting there and even like waved to them. And then the next day, he's unmoved in that location, and people are wondering what's going on. And they go and investigate and find out that the man is dead. And so there's been decades of mystery surrounding that. I think the gentleman was only identified just a couple of years ago. They were able to find out who he actually had been, because for 70 or 80 years, it was just a mystery. And yeah, in this one, there's Holmes in error. I like some of the stories, the original stories, where Holmes follows a trail and he may have good reason for it, but it doesn't end up being the truth. And I thought that it could be an interesting challenge to try to write that and then show how he takes it and follows it through to its conclusion. So those are the three stories. And like I mentioned, I am still writing. I'm on to the next project. Having gotten married in the middle of the school year, or near the end of the school year now, it's hard to keep writing, but I eventually do plan to put out volume 2 of the Archives of Sherlock Holmes. I will say that the story that I'm just finishing right now is about the terrible death of Crosby the banker, another one of those well-known stories. Interestingly, I've heard people say that the way that Watson wrote it, it was the Red Leech, something about the Red Leech and the death of Crosby the banker. And some people put them together and some people separate them. And at least in this version, I'm going to save the Red Leech for a different story. And this one's just going to be about the death of Crosby the banker. So I hope that that was an interesting look, at least, of the process that I went through, and some of the ways that the writing and the artwork in particular might have changed over time. But that is, that's just what I wanted to share with you guys. And like I said, I'm really thankful for the chance to get to do so with so many people who have such a great love for these stories like I do.
There we go. Thank you so much, Ben. So again, wonderful talk. And let's open it up for questions. Give me one sec, because my Zoom screen has changed slightly, and so I'm having a harder time seeing stuff. But we'll make it work. There we go. There we go. Now I can see better. All right, Larry, I see you've got your hand up. You want to unmute, my friend? Larry, you're muted.
Margie probably should be next because she's raising her hand too, very enthusiastically.
Okay, go ahead, Larry.
You're next, Larry.
All right. Anyway, a couple of things. I have noticed lately that this new idea of people emphasizing the illustrations of their pastiches. But I was doing a deep dive on the Speckled Band a little while ago, and one of the things that one of the people wrote about was Paget's choice of scenes and what he chose to illustrate. The illustrations are great, but he didn't always make. This guy thought, this one author thought, he didn't always make terrific choices on what aspects of the story to illustrate. And so I always wondered if we ever got a hold of an artist like you, Ben, perhaps, that maybe could kind of take a look at the stories newly and figure out really where, to re-illustrate the old stories in kind of a different way. Just choosing different scenes or different perspectives on it, because I am seeing a lot. As I said, I've seen a lot of illustrations lately of people illustrating their pastiches, which is a great tendency. I love it. Sherlock Holmes art is a great thing, and should continue. But I don't know. I thought I'd just toss that idea out to you.
That's an intriguing idea. Yeah, it certainly is. I'm thinking back over the Paget illustrations, and I can understand what you mean with. I wonder why that particular scene and not this scene. And some of them, I understand the struggle. I don't know how much choice, if he had complete control over what he chose to illustrate, or if Doyle perhaps made certain requests. But it is a challenge. In some of the stories that I've written, I want to illustrate several scenes, but it would put three illustrations back to back to back, and then maybe not a lot of the rest of the story would have it. And so I know that I was watching one recently. Oh, I'm terrible. I'm forgetting her name, but I know that she had got Frank Cho, the illustrator, to illustrate her books. Help me with her name. What was her name again?
Bonnie McBird.
Bonnie.
Yes, yes. And that was awesome because you talk about a world-class illustrator right there. And so I was looking up some of his work, what he'd done for Sherlock Holmes as well. And I think she talked about how they went about their selection process of the illustrations, but specifically about going back and illustrating some of those original stories. I had not thought of that, but it is an intriguing idea. If I'd have enough courage to add some artistic addition to one of those originals, then I can certainly see myself, taking a crack at that at some point.
Okay, well, thanks for thinking about it anyway.
Yeah.
And we'll see something.
All right, Margie.
Okay, I have a couple of things and I'll try not to talk forever. First, Ben, I've been following you on social media and been fascinated by what you've been posting with the pictures in the book. And so I'm delighted to listen to you talk today. So I'm really glad I made it. Yay for me. I would throw in real quick for you, Larry, and about this conversation. In Teller of Tales, there's an exchange recorded, but where Doyle is upset with the Strand artwork, giving too much of the story away when the art comes into the different pages. And so that might have a little bit to do with some of those stories of people just sitting around in chairs and whatnot, because he was trying to adhere to the fact that we can put an illustration here, but we can't give too much of the plot away. Don't know for sure, but that's something to think about. My other question for you, Ben, not that you're busy just because you just got married, you're changing jobs and moving to a different state. Do you have any interest in sharing contact information? I have a project that you might have some interest in that I would like to talk to you about, if that's okay. If you would put it down in the chat if you are. And I would also ask if you have any interest in any of Doyle's other work. I live a whole lot in Doyle's Gothic work. And so I was just curious if you had expanded out with Doyle other than Holmes.
I love some of his darker tales. I love like was it The Legend of Blue John Gap? The Terror of the Heights.
The Terror, yes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, just one of those little things I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, so yes,
Yeah,
okay, great.
So many of those, and it was only fairly recently that I kind of branched into it. There's a YouTube channel called Magpie Audio. Greg Wagland is the gentleman who narrates a lot of these stories, and so I'd love to give a shout out to him just because I think he does a wonderful job. He's done almost, I think, everything from Doyle, and then he's branched out into Edgar Allan Poe and so many others. But it was thanks to him where I was first listening to some of these other Doyle stories I'd never heard about, like The Brown Hands, or I think that's what it was, and then The Black Doctor. And I love all of those stories, just for that different take. You get that taste of Doyle, but it's certainly very different in tone sometimes. The Club-Footed Grocer, that's a dark one. Yeah, so I really love those stories as well, and I've certainly enjoyed listening to them and reading them.
Well, might I suggest a book from Belanger Books? We just happen to have one that mixes all those stories in Sherlock Holmes together, but anyway, I won't go around tooting our own horns, but all right. Well, thank you. And like I said, if you're willing to send me or to post how to contact you, I hope you don't mind if I do.
Not at all.
I loved your talk.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Margie. I think Ben, I think you made music for her ears a little bit with what you said. So that was good.
Oh, good. I'm happy.
All right, Ginny, and then Darren and Ruth.
Hi, Ben. First of all, I'm really impressed with all the research you put into the different types of media that you use and what works and what you feel doesn't work so well, but also in looking, to get a good feel for what the uh, atmosphere and all was in the stories. The thing that you said really early on was visualizing what you're reading. And I'm a very visual person. And if I start a story, if I anybody, it doesn't matter what kind or anything else, if I can't see what's going on in my mind, I stop reading the book. I mean, it means it's just doesn't interest me, no matter how well written it might be, because I need to be able to walk next to the characters as they're walking and see what they're seeing. And so I found that to be very interesting that you mentioned that, because I have since learned, and I feel so sorry for these people. There are people who have no vision at all in their minds ever. I mean, it just like uh, there's a word for it, one of those uh, medical terms,
Yeah.
but it's for people who just simply cannot. They There's nothing. When somebody says, "What are you thinking?" and they say nothing, they really mean nothing. I mean, there's like really nothing there, and I can't imagine my mind is constantly going, and
Mhm.
I visualize all kinds of stuff when I'm not reading. But when I'm reading, I really need to be able to see exactly what the people are seeing. And I don't mean that they need to put in a zillion details about everything, because that can get boring, but enough that I can see it. And so it was really good I had not read your books. I was not aware of you. And now I've got somebody, now another thing to go talk to my indie bookstore about and say, can you get these? Uh, because I think I would really enjoy your books.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And you're right. I mean, everyone's crafting in their mind and their imagination differently. And obviously, a visual artist, I see things that way. Others see in colors and or music. But I'm with you. I don't need a story that has 3 pages of descriptions. And I think Doyle and Watson do a pretty decent job of nice, succinct descriptions without getting too long-winded with it.
Mhm.
And I only hope that my writing is similar in that sense.
Well, I'm really looking forward to finding your books and reading them.
Thank you very much.
All right. And our last question comes from Rad over there, Darren and Ruth.
Really loved the presentation, Ben. I especially enjoyed the discussion of art. And just like Jenny was saying, I'm very visual and loved hearing all of that and all the thought you've given it, and learned some new things I didn't know, even though I consider myself a Sidney Paget fan. So thank you very much. Also, thanks to Margie for mentioning your social media, because I just found you on Instagram and followed you. So
Great.
I'll do that. But I'm looking forward to your books. I actually dropped both of them into my cart. I looked at Belanger Books site first, but didn't see them there, so I had to drop them in some other sites cart. But I'll be looking forward to those. And if you're moving to North Carolina, I just had to say, the Sherlock Holmes Society of Cape Fear is the North Carolina Scion. If you're interested in joining, we meet every Tuesday, the third Tuesday of every month, and Rich and Steve, who are here on this chat, are also regulars on there as well. So we'll always welcome you anytime. Fantastic time today. Thank you, Derek and Brian, for bringing him to this, because it was fabulous.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And you wouldn't find him on Belanger Books because we didn't publish him. So,
I have to occasionally, in between Belanger Books publications, I have to read someone else's.
oh no, I did that. Yeah, definitely. This is a place. This is a Scion Society. It's not for Belanger Books. So definitely.
I'm just joking.
Yeah, and one thing, Ben, I know we're a little over time, but one thought I had as I looked at your later work, as you're progressing your artwork, I'm finding you kind of, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, I'm seeing a little more of a Frederick Dorr Steele influence now in some of your pieces. Like that last particular image you had of Holmes, I thought looked kind of more like Steele, his artwork, and so Paget and Steele, are the two big Sherlock Holmes artists, and I really thought. And it's sometimes some of Steele's work actually like more than Paget. So anyway, I just thought it looked really nice. And just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, make a note of that because I want to go now and refresh my memory on those ones as well, and do a comparison to see. But it's been great, everyone. Thank you so much. I know that Sherlockians are a very welcoming group, and I just like the opportunity. I really appreciate it as I start out on this journey as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, another round of virtual applause for Ben. Thank you for taking time on a Saturday to have a talk with us. And next month, my friends, and it will be May 2nd, so just a couple weeks away, J. Lawrence Matthews, the author of The Case of the Disappearing Detective, as well as, and now I'm blanking on the name of the one about the bees. It's Sherlock Holmes Meeting Lincoln. He will be our guest, and really great author as well. And I look forward to having him on, and hopefully y'all can make it same time. Okay. So thank you again to Ben. And as always, thank you for spending some time on your Saturday with a bunch of Sherlockians. Take care, all. Bye now.
Bye.